The summer before I started first grade, my family moved to a dead-end street off Wyuka Road in suburban Atlanta. Our house faced a forest, out of which the neighborhood had been carved. A bookish child with an imagination full of stories, I knew what happened to little girls who ventured into woods. They were eaten by wolves. So I was tantalized and terrified by that forest. The only time I ventured into those woods deeply was in my dreams. Now, on our street, there was a baseball field surrounded by small pine trees. Max Shedden kept goats in a pen. My two brothers played touch football at Steve Schumann's house. Our neighborhood became the great outdoors for us. That summer, we were turned out after breakfast and not expected back till lunchtime, released again after lunch and not expected home till dark. The following year, I joined the Scouts. Our emblem was the wild rose, but every year we girls were tamed a little more. Our Scout leaders had few survival skills to share with us, but they did pass on their deep-seated anxiety about the dangers of the world. The badges that the wild roses earned would have made Jane Austen laugh. Stitchery, doll making, collecting, letter writing, rambling, and reading. No tire changing, no horseback riding, no putting up a pup tent, all activities that would have gotten our hands dirty and made us work up a sweat. Our three troop leaders each seemed to live in a different era. One in the 40s who wore sailor suits and sailor hats. One from the 50s with a bouffant hairdo and lacquered nails. One from the 60s with bangs cut straight across her forehead like a French schoolgirl. That mom and her family lived in a house on North Ivy, one road over from my street. Behind their house was the Peachtree Gardens Dance Hall. Built in the 20s by the father-in-law of our Scout leader, it was the embodiment of the great indoors. Elegant and white columned, it was a place that could be rented by grown-ups for dinner and dancing. The Arthur Murray Dance Studio taught classes there. These were occasions I could only imagine, like Cinderella's wedding ball. So I would peer at the facade of the clubhouse every time we circled past it, alert for the glint of a glass slipper. Running by our Scout leader's house was Little Nancy Creek. The summer after third grade, some Statewood Road kids decided we were going to have a picnic on its banks. That morning, I made myself a sandwich and then I met another girl. We walked off Statewood, down Wyuka, down North Ivy till we came to the bridge over the creek. Then we climbed through the dense vegetation to sit on the creek side. No one else showed up for our picnic. So we ate our sandwiches, serenaded by cicadas in the heat of the day. And we waded in the muddy water before walking home. There I found my panicked mother, distraught because I had not come home for lunch. Apparently, news of the planned picnic was not as widespread as I had imagined. Coming home unharmed from the land of the dead, I got spanked for my efforts. My fellow picnicker came down with a terrible case of poison ivy. And so I learned to confine myself to our dead-end street. Still in the spring of 4th grade, I was deemed old enough to walk home by myself from piano lessons. My teacher lived on Wayuka Road, about 5 blocks away. Exuding confidence, I carried my sandals in one hand and my music books in the other. I had made it about 4 blocks when I noticed a white paneled truck driving slowly behind me. I was almost to Statewood Road when the truck driver called out the passenger side window, "Hey, do you know where Ball Street is?" I shook my head no. "Well, have you ever seen one of these before?" I had to stand on my tiptoes to look into the cab of his truck. And at first I couldn't make out what I was seeing, a long pink creature covered in tightly curled hair. It was his naked leg and thigh. In his hand, the truck driver handled his personal stick shift. Now, I hadn't seen one that big, but I knew what it was. From toddler bath times with my brothers, I had recognized the different geography of their bodies and mine. So I said to him, "Yeah, I've seen one of those." "Where'd you see it?" "My brothers," I told him with disdain. Perhaps he was an only child. "Where did you see your brothers?" Now that question stopped me in my tracks. Suddenly I was embarrassed to share this intimate family scenario with a stranger who had no pants on. So I took off, running across that last yard and down Statewood Road. I was bound for the baseball field and those pine trees, hiding between them. I tried for the first time in my life to make myself small in a world in which men drove trucks without pants on. When I had caught my breath, I picked up my things and I walked on home, and I told my mother what had happened. She called the police and they came and took my statement. The next day at school, another Girl Scout said, "Do you know what happened to me yesterday?" And I answered, "Was he driving a white paneled truck?" As soon as the news spread that a coterie of wild roses had been flashed in broad daylight on a busy street, our troop leaders brought a policewoman to talk to us. Her message was the same that our parents had been hinting all along. Little girls weren't safe roaming in the great outdoors. I never again walked home by myself from piano lessons. A few years later, our scout leaders told us that we were going on an overnight camping trip chaperoned by some of the dads. Now, an engaged father was as rare in our lives as they are in fairy tales. And when that designated Friday rolled around at last, the dads were occupied elsewhere. Going camping without them was beyond imagination. Our coiffed and cuticle polished troop leader, and the one who wore hats from the 40s, and the one with the straight cut bangs conferred. And they came up with an alternate plan. They shepherded the white roses to the Peachtree Gardens dance hall for a camp out in the great indoors. We arrived dressed in our PJs and stood around an oil drum in the parking lot, roasting our marshmallows to put on our s'mores. Then we went inside and laid our sleeping bags on the polished wooden dance floor and told ghost stories just at the edge of the bandstand. In the morning, by the time the clock stopped striking 9, our parents all arrived to take us home, our faces still smeared with marshmallow and melted chocolate. Fast forward 40 years. I was visiting my mother when she told me that the Peachtree Gardens dance hall was about to be demolished. It had been neglected for decades. The roof had been struck away by windstorms, and now the place was not salvageable. So I went to pay my last respects. There was already a bulldozer parked in the parking lot. The doors were all open. The sun shone down on a gaping hole in the roof. I stepped inside and surveyed what was left of the polished wooden dance floor. On one side, there was an office alcove that looked like the manager had left one day for lunch and never returned. A desk still covered in papers stood at the ready, its drawers pulled open. In one of them, I saw a set of grimy keys on a chain. Having gotten my badge for collecting, I reached in and picked up the keys and pocketed them. Then I stepped back outside to a chorus of cicadas. By now, the woods across from my mother's house have all been cut down. Every day, there is less of the great outdoors. But since our wild rose days, I have gone hiking on the Appalachian Trail and wilderness camped on Cumberland Island and explored the landscape of several states. And in all my roaming, I've never encountered a wolf. But I do sometimes encounter the anxiety that I was taught to feel as a girl, confined to small spaces in a wider world that belongs to men. And as a collector of stories and of totems, both magical and mysterious, I still have the keys to the great indoors.